They laughed at the cook, mocked her questions, dismissed her as nothing. But when their billion-dollar project collapsed, it was she, and a single napkin, who saved them all. Eleanor Vance, a 62-year-old black woman whose frame, slightly stooped from decades of hard work, moved silently through the corridors of the corporate giant each morning. Her world, steeped in the scent of fresh bread and the steam from industrial pots, was infinitely removed from their world of sterile labs, glowing monitors, and reality-altering equations. She was the head cook, a title that, at GenTech, made her as invisible as the cafeteria furniture. Her colleagues in the kitchen respected her for her quiet dignity and for hands that seemed capable of creating a masterpiece from the simplest ingredients. She moved with methodical precision, whether she was dicing vegetables with mathematical exactitude or calculating the proportions for a complex sauce. Her movements possessed an economy and logic that no one bothered to notice. But to the white-collar geniuses on the 34th floor, she was merely part of the service staff, a faceless entity who occasionally appeared with a tray of sandwiches during their marathon meetings. They laughed at her simple curiosity when she once asked a young lab assistant about the strange, sweet odors wafting from the vents, never suspecting that this simple cook had once been a brilliant chemical engineer. Her promising career, one that held the potential for incredible discoveries, had been shattered by systemic prejudice and the cold cruelty of the corporate world, forcing her to bury her knowledge beneath the layers of a cook's apron. 40 years ago, she had been accused of instability and being overly emotional when she dared to question the safety protocols of her influential mentor's project. Her name was quietly added to unofficial blacklists, and the doors to the world of high science slammed shut forever. And now, as their revolutionary, billion-dollar project, Phoenix, teetered on the brink of catastrophe, and dozens of PhDs desperately racked their brains, unable to find the flaw, Eleanor, wiping her hands on her apron, did something no one expected. She pointed out the one simple detail they had arrogantly overlooked, and in 10 minutes, she solved the problem that could have destroyed the company and altered the fate of every single person within its walls. The crisis at GenTech began quietly, like a hairline crack in reinforced glass, slowly spreading under pressure. Project Phoenix was the company's crown jewel, the pinnacle of their scientific ambitions. It was a revolutionary biocomposite capable of self-regeneration, promising to change everything from regenerative medicine to the creation of ultra-durable materials for aerospace. But suddenly, without any apparent reason, it became unstable. The samples, worth millions, began to disintegrate right on the lab benches, transforming from a material as hard as diamond into a useless, murky sludge. Panic, cold and sticky like a fog, enveloped the 34th floor, where the main laboratories were housed. "This is impossible," shouted Alex Sterling, the 32-year-old CEO. He had inherited the company from his legendary father and was desperately trying to prove he was worthy of the position. His perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit couldn't hide the tension that crackled in every move he made. "We have the best minds in the country, the most advanced equipment. We've poured $500 million into this. How could you not see this coming?" His furious gaze was fixed on Dr. Randall, the gray-haired project lead, whose face had paled to the color of his own lab coat. Randall was a luminary in his field, but right now, he looked utterly lost. "We've checked every variable, Alex. Temperature, pressure, component purity, humidity. We've run hundreds of simulations. The formula is flawless. It has to be an external factor, something unaccounted for that we're just not seeing." While they argued heatedly in the glass-walled conference room, one floor below, in the corporate kitchen, Eleanor Vance noticed something strange. She had been working here for 5 years, and her nose had grown accustomed to the routine scents of the cafeteria: coffee, baked goods, cleaning supplies. But that week, a faint, sweetish odor began to drift from the ventilation shaft connected to the lab wing. It wasn't the smell of food or perfume. It was a scent that transported her 40 years back in time, to a bustling university laboratory where she, young and full of hope, had worked on her first major project in polymer chemistry. It was the smell of catalytic decay, the smell of failure, which she had memorized for life. She saw lab assistants hurrying past the kitchen with empty waste containers, and the same scent trailed them. No one else seemed to pay it any mind. To them, it was just another weird lab smell. To Eleanor, it was a blaring alarm. She remembered her old professor once telling her, "Eleanor, a great chemist doesn't just look. They listen, and they smell. Sometimes your nose can tell you more than the most expensive spectrometer." No one paid any attention as she lingered after her shift by the panoramic windows separating the hallway from the Phoenix lab. Through the glass, she saw the flurry of activity, the worried faces of the scientists, and an enraged Alex waving his arms. The massive whiteboard was covered in a complex equation that took up nearly the entire surface. Eleanor's eyes, trained by years of analysis and observation, scanned it. The formula was, indeed, elegant, flawless. But then her gaze dropped lower, to the lab tables. They were lined with rows of new, gleaming plastic containers branded BioSafe 7. The company had recently switched to them, and Eleanor even remembered the chatter in the cafeteria about how the new supplier had offered a better price. Cost-effective, eco-friendly, perfect for the annual corporate report. And in that, she realized in a flash of insight, was the answer. The next morning, Eleanor resolved to act. She couldn't stand by and watch years of work and a billion-dollar investment crumble because of a simple, overlooked detail. Armed with a quiet determination, she timed her morning coffee delivery to the lab's break room to coincide with the team's frantic early morning meeting. She found the same young assistant from the day before, a man named Tim, grabbing a coffee, his face etched with stress. "Excuse me, young man," she began softly, her voice calm amidst the palpable tension. "I have a strange question. About those new containers you're using for Project Phoenix." Tim stopped, turning to her with an air of impatience. He looked her up and down, the simple cook in her plain white apron, and a condescending smile touched his lips. "What about them? They're state-of-the-art. Certified." "I was just wondering," Eleanor continued, ignoring his tone, "if anyone has tested them for plasticizer leaching when exposed to your lithium-based stabilizing agent. Sometimes, under specific pH conditions, certain polymers can." He cut her off with a laugh, loud enough for a few other stressed-out scientists nearby to hear. "Plasticizer leaching? Ma'am, with all due respect, what do you know about polymer chemistry?" He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "Shouldn't you be worried about whether the soup is salty enough? We have a team of world-class PhDs working on this. I think we can handle it." His colleague snickered. The dismissal was a physical blow, a familiar sting that echoed across 4 decades. It wasn't just his words. It was the casual, unthinking arrogance that assumed her uniform defined the limits of her intellect. Eleanor felt a weary disappointment settle in her chest. She had seen this exact brand of prideful blindness destroy projects before. "Of course," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "Just a thought." She turned and walked away, his laughter following her down the hallway like a bad echo. She knew then that speaking to them directly was useless. They were trapped in their own intellectual fortress, and the guards wouldn't let in a truth delivered by a cook. That evening, Eleanor stayed late, long after the last of the kitchen staff had gone home. The skyscraper was quiet, a hollowed-out shell of its daytime self. She moved through the empty cafeteria, her cleaning cart gliding silently over the polished floors. But she wasn't just cleaning. She was thinking. The image of the frantic scientists, blind to the simple solution right in front of them, wouldn't leave her mind. She made her way up to the 34th floor. The lab was dark, save for the faint, rhythmic blinking of equipment lights. The cleaning crew had already been through. Using a keycard she was trusted with for late-night maintenance, she let herself into the lab's antechamber. The main lab was sealed, but the conference room attached to it was accessible. The massive whiteboard still bore the elegant, complex, and utterly useless formula for Project Phoenix. Below it, in a frantic scrawl, were dozens of failed hypotheses and crossed-out calculations. They were looking for a monster in the dark, she thought, when the problem was the light bulb itself. She took a clean napkin from her pocket and a pen she used for grocery lists. With a steady hand, a hand that hadn't written a chemical equation in years but had never forgotten the language, she wrote a simple line. C6H4, COR, 2 plus Li stabilizer catalytic degradation? Check container material. It wasn't a full explanation, just a breadcrumb. A simple question aimed at the heart of the problem. She folded the napkin neatly and propped it up against the base of the whiteboard, directly under the main formula, where no one could miss it. Then, as silently as she had come, she left. The next morning, the napkin was discovered by Dr. Randall himself. He picked it up, read the equation, and frowned in confusion. "What is this?" he asked, showing it to his team. Tim, the young assistant, recognized the theme. "It must be a prank," he said with a nervous laugh. "The cafeteria lady was asking me about plasticizers yesterday. This must be her idea of a joke." The suggestion that the solution could come from the kitchen staff was met with derision. "A cook playing chemist? That's rich," another scientist scoffed. "She probably saw something on a daytime TV show." Dr. Randall crumpled the napkin in his fist. His pride, already wounded by his team's failure, couldn't allow for the possibility that the answer was this simple, this undignified. To entertain it would be to admit that his entire team, with their advanced degrees and multi-million-dollar equipment, had been outsmarted by an elderly cook. "We don't have time for this nonsense," he declared, tossing the crumpled napkin into the trash. "Get back to the simulations. The error has to be in the quantum modeling." As one of his assistants wiped the whiteboard clean for a new set of calculations, he unknowingly brushed away the last, best hope they had. Meanwhile, in his penthouse office, Alex Sterling's frustration was curdling into cold fury. The deadline for the investor demonstration was now less than 24 hours away, and his team was no closer to a solution. Every update from Dr. Randall was filled with technical jargon that amounted to the same thing: failure. He slammed his fist on his mahogany desk. "Find it," he roared into his intercom, his voice echoing in the sterile office. "I don't care what it takes. I want a solution, not excuses. The future of this company is on the line." Downstairs, in the now-clean lab, the discarded napkin lay at the bottom of a trash can, a silent testament to a truth that had been offered, ridiculed, and ultimately ignored. Eleanor, serving coffee in the executive lounge, heard the CEO's shouts. She knew then that her quiet hint had failed. If Project Phoenix was to be saved, she would have to do more than leave a note. She would have to step out of the shadows, and this time, she would make them listen. The clock in the lab ticked with agonizing slowness, each second a hammer blow against the fragile morale of the Phoenix team. The investor demonstration was now just 2 hours away. Dr. Randall's team had exhausted every option, their faces pale with the grim acceptance of defeat. Alex Sterling paced the length of the lab like a caged tiger. His fury had burned down to a cold, terrifying calm. "It's over," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Call the investors. Tell them the demonstration is canceled. Tell them Project Phoenix is dead." Dr. Randall opened his mouth to protest, but no words came. The weight of their collective failure was crushing. It was into this suffocating silence that Eleanor Vance walked. She didn't knock. She simply pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside, moving with a purpose that seemed entirely out of place for a cafeteria cook. In her hand, she held a simple glass beaker, the kind used in high school chemistry classes, which she had retrieved from a dusty old supply closet. "What are you doing in here?" Alex snarled, spinning around to face her. The sight of her, so calm in the midst of his empire's collapse, was an infuriating paradox. "I told you to stay out. Security. Get her out of here now." The scientist stared, bewildered. Tim, the young assistant who had mocked her, looked particularly mortified. Eleanor did not flinch. She met the CEO's blazing eyes and held up the glass beaker. "You're about to lose $1 billion because you're looking in the wrong place," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an undeniable authority that cut through the panic. "The problem isn't your science. It's your container." Alex froze, momentarily stunned by her audacity. "My container?" he repeated, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. "After a week of nonstop work by the world's leading experts, you're telling me the problem is a piece of plastic?" "Yes," she said simply. The sheer, unadorned confidence of her answer left him speechless. It was Dr. Randall who found his voice first, a sputtering mix of indignation and disbelief. "This is absurd. We are in the middle of a catastrophic failure, and you're letting the kitchen staff disrupt us with folk theories? This is a circus." Alex, however, was no longer looking at Randall. His eyes were fixed on Eleanor. He saw no fear in her gaze, no hint of delusion. He saw only a profound, unshakable certainty. He was a man who trusted data and credentials above all else. But in that moment, faced with the abyss of total failure, a sliver of irrationality broke through his defenses. He had nothing left to lose. "Fine," he bit out, the word sharp as a shard of glass. "You want to play scientist? You have 5 minutes." He pointed to the ticking clock on the wall. 5 minutes to prove that you're not wasting my time. If you can't, I will personally have you escorted out of this building and ensure you never work in this city again. Do you understand?" "Perfectly," Eleanor replied. The entire lab watched in a state of suspended disbelief as she walked to the main workstation. She took one of the failing samples, a beaker of murky, separated sludge that was once Project Phoenix, and gently placed it on the counter. "For the last week," she began, her voice now that of a lecturer addressing a class, "you have been searching for a complex flaw in a perfect formula. But the simplest rule of chemistry is that a substance is only as stable as its environment." She pointed to the BioSafe 7 container. "This plastic is new to your lab. It's cheaper, and its manufacturer, to cut costs, used a different plasticizing agent, a phthalate-based compound not listed in the initial safety specs. This compound leaches into your solution." She then pointed to the complex formula on the whiteboard. "And it reacts directly with your lithium-ion stabilizer. It doesn't just inhibit it, it aggressively breaks it down. You haven't been witnessing degradation. You've been witnessing a chemical reaction you introduced yourselves." She then picked up her simple glass beaker. "Glass," she said, holding it up to the light, "is inert. It does not react." With steady hands, she carefully poured the sludgy, failed compound from the high-tech plastic container into the cheap glass beaker. The room held its breath. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Alex crossed his arms, a cynical, "I told you so" expression forming on his face. But then, a subtle change began. Slowly, miraculously, the murky liquid began to clear. The separated components started to swirl, drawn together as if by an invisible force. The murky brown faded, replaced by the composite's original, vibrant emerald green. Within a minute, the liquid solidified, reforming its complex crystalline structure until it was once again a solid, perfect sample of Project Phoenix, gleaming under the lab lights. Absolute silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the ventilation system, the very system that had carried the scent of failure to Eleanor's knowing nose. Dr. Randall stared, his mouth agape. Tim's face was ashen with shame. The other scientists looked from the stable sample to the elderly cook as if they had just witnessed an act of magic. Alex Sterling stood rooted to the spot. His entire worldview, a world built on Ivy League degrees, peer-reviewed papers, and the absolute authority of certified experts, had just been dismantled by a woman in a cook's uniform holding a simple glass beaker. He looked at her, at this shadow who had moved through his life unnoticed, and for the very first time, he truly saw her. Of course, here is the fourth part of the story. Start of text file, part 4 of 5. The investor demonstration was a stunning success. With the compound now perfectly stable in gleaming glass containers, Dr. Randall, under Alex's watchful eye, flawlessly executed the presentation. The Swiss investors were beyond impressed. They were ecstatic, immediately signaling their intent to double their initial investment. The lab team, still reeling from the morning's events, managed a performance of relieved professionalism, their hushed, respectful glances toward the kitchen staff entrance being the only sign that anything was amiss. Alex Sterling accepted their congratulations with a practiced smile, but his mind was elsewhere. He shook hands, discussed timelines, and talked about market disruption, but his thoughts kept returning to the quiet, elderly woman who was, at that very moment, likely back in the cafeteria preparing the afternoon snack service. The dissonance was staggering. As soon as the investors had been escorted to their waiting cars, Alex turned to his personal assistant. "Find Eleanor Vance," he commanded, his voice low and serious. "Bring her to my office. Now." The summons caused a ripple of confusion. Eleanor was in the middle of plating desserts when the flustered assistant found her. "Mr. Sterling wants to see you. In the penthouse office," she stammered, as if the words themselves were unbelievable. Eleanor calmly untied her apron, washed her hands, and followed the assistant to the executive elevator. It was a swift, silent ride to the 60th floor, a part of the building she had only ever seen from the outside. The doors opened into a hushed, opulent world of polished marble, expensive art, and panoramic city views. Alex's office was vast, occupying the entire corner of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city like the gaze of a god. A single, massive mahogany desk sat in the center, an island of power in a sea of luxurious emptiness. Alex was standing by the window, his back to the door. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Eleanor did, the soft click of the latch echoing in the cavernous space. He turned to face her, his expression a complex mixture of awe, shame, and profound curiosity. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a vulnerability she had never expected to see. "Who are you?" he asked, the question raw and genuine. "Please, I need to know who you really are." Eleanor met his gaze, and for the first time, she allowed herself to stand not as a cook, but as the woman she had once been. She told him her story. She spoke of her passion for chemistry, of being the only black woman in her doctoral program, of the excitement of discovery. She described her research, the dangerous flaw she uncovered in her celebrated professor's work, and the choice she made to report it, knowing it would likely end her career. "They called it insubordination," she said, her voice even, devoid of self-pity. "But it was a safety issue that could have cost lives. After I was dismissed, my professor made a few calls. I was blacklisted. No lab would hire me. No university would accept my transfer credits." She told him about the years that followed, about taking on menial jobs to care for her ailing parents, about the slow, painful process of burying her ambitions one by one until all that was left was the quiet dignity of a job well done, no matter how humble. "I never stopped learning," she finished, looking out the window at the city below. "I read scientific journals at the public library. I watched documentaries. The world of science moved on without me, but I never left it completely." Alex listened in complete silence, each word of her story chipping away at the foundation of his own privileged life. He had built his career on the idea of a pure meritocracy, believing that the best and brightest always rise to the top. Eleanor Vance was living, breathing proof that he was wrong. She was a genius he had tasked with making his lunch. "I am so sorry," he said, and the words felt inadequate, hollow. "What our world, what people like me, did to you is unforgivable." "There is nothing to forgive," Eleanor replied, her gaze steady. "It is simply what happened. The world is not always fair, but it can be changed." The conviction in her voice struck him. She wasn't asking for an apology or for pity. She was stating a principle. He walked back to his desk and sat down, looking at her as if she were a foreign dignitary, not an employee. "You saved my company today, Eleanor. More than that, you saved me from my own blindness. I want to offer you a position." He paused, then continued, "I am creating a new department, the Division of Applied Innovation and Quality Control. It will have oversight on all our major projects, a final check on everything we do, from materials to methodology. I want you to run it, as its first director." The offer hung in the air between them. A title, a salary that would change her life, a return to the world that had cast her out. Eleanor considered it for a long moment. It was more than she had ever allowed herself to dream of again. But she knew that a title for herself wasn't enough. "I will accept," she said finally. "On one condition." Alex leaned forward, intrigued. "Name it. I want to create a program within GenTech," she explained. "We'll call it the Keystone Initiative. It will be designed to find and nurture talent in unconventional places within this company. Among the janitorial staff, the security guards, the kitchen workers. We will provide education, mentorship, and opportunities for anyone who shows an aptitude and a passion for science, regardless of their background or formal education. We will not overlook anyone ever again." Alex stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. "You're not just asking for a job," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "You're asking for a revolution." "I'm asking for a chance," she corrected gently. "For everyone." He stood up and extended his hand across the vast desk. "Then it's a deal, Director Vance. Let's start a revolution." As Eleanor shook his hand, she felt a sense of rightness, of a circle finally closing after 40 long years. She was no longer a shadow, no longer invisible. She was a force, and she was about to help an entire company learn how to see. 6 months later, the sterile, high-pressure atmosphere of GenTech innovations had begun to change. The air on the 34th floor still hummed with the energy of brilliant minds at work, but it was now tempered with a new, collaborative spirit. The invisible walls between the labs and the service floors had started to crumble, replaced by bridges of opportunity and respect. Eleanor Vance, now universally known as Dr. Vance, a title Alex had insisted upon after discovering she had completed her dissertation defense before being blacklisted, stood in a newly constructed lab. It wasn't as large as the main Phoenix lab, but it was bright, modern, and bore a simple plaque on the door, Keystone Initiative, Development Lab. She wore a crisp white lab coat over a simple but elegant dress. Her posture was no longer stooped from years of leaning over pots and pans. It was the upright, confident stance of a leader and mentor. Across from her, a young man named Leo, who 6 months ago had been a night shift janitor, carefully adjusted a microscope. "I think I've found it, Dr. Vance," he said, his voice filled with the thrill of discovery. "The cell mutation is responding to the enzyme variant. The degradation has slowed by 70%. Eleanor looked through the eyepiece, a warm, proud smile on her face. "Your methodology was sound, Leo. You isolated the variable perfectly. What's your next step?" "I want to try introducing a protein binder. I think it could halt the degradation completely," he replied, his eyes shining with an intelligence that had, until recently, been spent on calculating the most efficient way to mop a hallway. Leo was the first graduate of the Keystone Initiative. Eleanor had discovered him after he submitted an idea through the new anonymous portal, a detailed suggestion for improving the efficiency of the lab sanitation protocols that showed a deep, intuitive understanding of chemical interactions. After a series of tests and interviews, she had brought him into her program. He was a natural. The lab door slid open and Alex Sterling walked in. He wasn't wearing his usual power suit, but a more casual blazer and an open-collared shirt. He no longer strode into rooms with the air of an owner. He entered with the curiosity of a collaborator. "Leo, Dr. Vance," he greeted them warmly. "I just saw your latest report. Halting the degradation is one thing, but reversing it? That's groundbreaking." "It was Leo's hypothesis," Eleanor said, stepping back to give the young man the credit. "He noticed a pattern in the cellular decay that everyone else, myself included, had missed." Alex looked at Leo with genuine respect. "That's the kind of thinking that's going to define the future of this company," he said. The board was skeptical about the Keystone Initiative at first. They saw it as a charity project. But after your team filed 3 provisional patents in the last 2 months, they're starting to see it for what it is, our single greatest competitive advantage. He then turned to Eleanor, a hint of the old, humbling memory in his eyes. "We almost missed it. We almost threw all this potential away because we were too arrogant to look past a uniform." Later that day, Eleanor and Alex stood in his penthouse office, looking out at the same panoramic view. The tension that had once defined their interactions in this room was gone, replaced by a comfortable, easy partnership. "I had lunch in the cafeteria today," Alex said casually. "The suggestion box you put up was overflowing. Someone from the mailroom has an idea for optimizing our logistics network. A security guard has designed a more energy-efficient lighting system for the parking garage." Eleanor smiled. "Talent is everywhere, Alex. You just have to be willing to look for it. And listen to it," he added, his voice filled with a humility that had been forged in the crucible of his near failure. "You know, Project Phoenix is set to launch next quarter. The investors are calling it the most important biotech innovation of the decade. They're hailing me as a visionary." He shook his head with a wry smile. "Every time they do, I think of that day in the lab. I think of you, a crumpled napkin, and a simple glass beaker." "We all have our moments of clarity," Eleanor said kindly. "You were mine," he replied, his sincerity absolute. "You didn't just save a project, Eleanor. You saved this company's soul. You saved mine." He gestured to a small, framed document on his wall, positioned right next to his father's portrait. It was the napkin on which she had written the equation, now preserved behind glass. A permanent reminder that the most profound truths often come in the humblest of packages. The story of the cook who saved GenTech had become a quiet legend within the company, a modern fable about the importance of seeing the person, not the position. Dr. Randall had taken a voluntary sabbatical, returning months later with a renewed and more humble approach to science. Tim, the young assistant, had personally apologized to Eleanor and was now one of the most enthusiastic mentors in the Keystone Initiative. Eleanor Vance never lost the quiet dignity that had defined her in the kitchen. She led her division with wisdom, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to finding the hidden genius in others. She had proven that a person's worth is not determined by the clothes they wear or the title on their door, but by the contents of their mind and the courage in their heart. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the GenTech tower, Eleanor and Alex stood in comfortable silence, two leaders from vastly different worlds, now united by a shared vision. The shadow had stepped into the light, not just for her own sake, but to illuminate the path for everyone else who had been left in the dark. What if the next great breakthrough, the next world-changing idea, is hidden in plain sight, waiting inside the mind of someone you overlook every day? If this story inspired you to see the world and the people in it a little differently, please like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it to remind others that true genius doesn't have a dress code.